When I opened my eyes, I was back at the moment I handed in my resignation letter. Without hesitation, I tore the thin piece of paper into shreds. Principal, I've made up my mind. I'm willing to go teach in the remote mountain areas. I'll leave in half a month. Emma Carter, have you lost your mind? Ethan Walker's voice was filled with suppressed anger. I'm going to the mining site for work, to provide a better life for you and our son. What's the point of you following me there? Our son is still so young. My parents' health isn't great either. Someone needs to stay and take care of them. Can't you think things through? At your age, why are you still acting so irrationally? His cold, piercing eyes locked onto mine, snapping me out of my daze. My fingers trembled, clutching the resignation letter, already soaked with tears. I lowered my head and looked at the blurred ink through misty eyes. A sharp pain pricked at my heart, as if countless tiny needles were piercing through it. In my past life, I had ignored Ethan's objections, resigned from my job, and insisted on following him to the mining site. With no one left to take care of my in-laws and our son, we had no choice but to bring them along. The conditions at the mine were unimaginably harsh, but I gritted my teeth and endured it all. I took care of Ethan's parents, staying by their side until their final days, but even on their deathbeds, they still clung to my hand and earnestly pleaded with me. Emma, we know you're unwilling to accept this, but what else can we do? Ethan has sacrificed so much for this family his entire life. Now that our son is grown, please, let him go. I stood stiffly by the hospital bed, biting my lip, refusing to say a word. The words of protest were right on the tip of my tongue, but when I looked at their frail, sunken faces, I couldn't bring myself to say them. I wanted to ask, why? Why, after everything I had done for this family, was I still seen as the obstacle in Ethan's pursuit of happiness? Seeing me hesitate to agree to the divorce, my son, Ryan Walker, the very child I had poured my heart into raising, lost his patience. He stormed over, grabbed me by the collar, and dragged me out of the room, shoving me onto the cold hospital corridor floor. Mom, look at yourself, he sneered, his expression cold and distant. Do you really think you're worthy of Dad? He's been stuck with you all these years. Can't you think about him for once? Let him go. If you agree to the divorce today, I'll still see you as my mother in the future. But if you refuse, don't blame me for cutting ties with you. When you're old and dying, you'll have no one left to bury you. I tilted my head up, desperately trying to see his face clearly. This was my son, the child I had raised with all my love and devotion. And yet now, he looked at me with nothing but indifference. Hatred surged in my chest, boiling over. The metallic taste of blood rose in my throat. I couldn't hold it back. I coughed up a mouthful of blood. But he was so heartless, he didn't even spare me a glance. I struggled to get up, stumbling toward the hospital room. I wanted to ask them, what did I do wrong? But before I could step inside, Ryan slammed the door shut in my face. Even as I desperately reached out to stop it, he showed no hesitation. The heavy door crushed my fingers, sending searing pain through my body. It felt like my very soul was being torn apart. That night, I sat on the cold hallway floor, my heart drowning in despair. I refused to accept this. For this family, I had willingly given up my dignified career. I had worked tirelessly, sacrificing decades of my life. And in the end, they all told me I wasn't good enough for Ethan Walker. They all forced me to let go. They wanted me to step aside so that he and Olivia Brooks could be together. But why? Why was I the one who had to let go? Where was Olivia? That night, when I returned home in a daze, Ethan was sitting at the dining table, smiling as he picked food onto Olivia's plate. They looked so comfortable, so perfectly matched. I trembled with rage, my body shaking uncontrollably. With a heart full of hatred, I flipped over the dining table. Then, I grabbed the divorce papers he had prepared for me and tore them to shreds, throwing the pieces in his face. Ethan Walker, you stole decades of my life, and now you want to run off with her? My voice was filled with fury. You want a divorce? Fine. Over my dead body. Ethan immediately stepped forward, shielding Olivia in his arms. His expression was ice cold as he watched me lose control. Once I was done venting, he didn't even bother arguing with me. He simply held Olivia and walked away. His posture was still as straight as ever. Olivia was still as elegant and radiant as before. Only I, after years of hardship, was left with a hunched back and strands of gray in my hair, and when their figures finally disappeared from sight, I collapsed onto the ground, gasping for air. Over and over, I told myself, I must never let go so easily. Even if I had to die, I would drag them down with me. I never expected my words to become a prophecy. Half a month later, I died beneath a collapsed mine. And the one who sealed my fate was none other than the husband I had devoted my entire life to loving. To save Olivia Brooks, Ethan Walker chose to saw off my legs. In my final moments, I watched in despair as he carried Olivia in his arms and ran for safety. My heart was filled with nothing but regret. Why had I wasted my short life on someone like him? Now, staring at my still intact legs, I couldn't help but laugh. How wonderful, my legs were still here. My life had just begun. I still had time to change everything. Ethan frowned, his expression dark with displeasure. Emma, did you even listen to a word I just said? I smiled at him and, without hesitation, tore up the resignation letter in my hands and threw the pieces into the burning stove. I heard you loud and clear. I'm not going with you. Ethan stood frozen in place, staring at me in disbelief. After a long moment, he finally regained his composure, the corners of his lips curling into a mocking smirk. Oh, so now you're playing hard to get? Don't think I don't see through your little tricks. A few days from now, you'll be crying and making a scene to force me to agree. He scoffed. Whatever. If you want to come, I won't stop you. I'm heading to the station to pick up Olivia. Make sure dinner's ready when I get back. And don't forget to buy some pork. Olivia loves pork stew with vermicelli. That's right. I remembered now. Today was the day Olivia Brooks had specifically traveled here to reunite with Ethan. In my past life, I had foolishly believed Ethan's words when he told me it was just an old classmate he hadn't seen in years. When she arrived, I went out of my way to welcome her warmly. Not wanting to delay Ethan's transfer process, I had even stood in line for hours to buy them 2 sleeper train tickets while I, trying to save money, had only bought myself a standing ticket. I spent 2 whole days standing on the train, holding our child and caring for his parents, while he and Olivia comfortably rested in their seats. I watched coldly as Ethan adjusted his collar in front of the mirror, smoothing it out carefully before wetting his fingers to neaten his hair. His eyes glowed with barely concealed excitement. As he turned to leave, I stepped in front of him, blocking his path. He looked at me, puzzled, as I stretched out my palm. The money for the pork? His face immediately darkened. But I didn't care in the slightest. We had been married for 6 years. Our son was already 4. And yet, not once had he ever given me a single penny for household expenses. Back then, I never asked him for money, thinking that since I had my own salary, it wasn't necessary. It wasn't until we moved to the mining site that I realized, the entire time, for 6 whole years, every cent he earned had been sent to Olivia Brooks. I still vividly remembered the day I discovered the truth. I cried and demanded an explanation. Annoyed by my questions, he dismissed me with a single sentence. Emma, I never realized you were such a petty, narrow-minded woman. I trembled, struggling to find words to refute him, but before I could speak, he shoved me aside and walked out the door without looking back, leaving me sobbing alone. He knew how hard I had worked all those years. My salary had never been high, barely enough to feed a family of 5. Our son needed tuition, his parents needed medicine and doctor visits. When the money wasn't enough, I picked up extra work washing clothes for others after my teaching hours. In the dead of winter, my fingers were covered in painful, bleeding chilblains, throbbing every time they brushed against the icy water. He saw it all. And yet, without hesitation, he had sent every last penny to another woman. So what did my sacrifices mean? But now, I saw everything clearly. To this family, I had never been anything more than a servant. I wouldn't be foolish anymore. I wouldn't give without expecting anything in return. Seeing that I had no intention of stepping aside, Ethan's expression flickered, shifting between irritation and unease. He remained silent for a long moment. He gritted his teeth and said, "Then forget the pork. Just make something simple." Without another word, he avoided looking at me and hurried out the door. I curled my lips into a slight smirk, watching his figure disappear. Ignoring my son's cries and my in-laws' anxious calls, I turned around and calmly walked out the door. I ran all the way to the principal's office, barely catching my breath before blurting out, "Principal, I've made up my mind. I'm willing to go teach in the mountain areas." He looked at me in shock, not bothering to hide his surprise. "Are you sure? Just a few days ago, you told me you were resigning to follow Ethan to the mines." I met his gaze with unwavering determination. "I'm sure. I should be giving back to society, helping the country nurture more talented individuals, not wasting my knowledge doing physical labor in a mining site. I'm not afraid of hardship or exhaustion, but I refuse to let my education go to waste." The principal's eyes were filled with admiration, though he still seemed a bit hesitant. "Remember, think it over carefully. You're the best candidate for this program, but your son is still so young. If you leave, you won't be able to return for at least a few years." I smiled and responded with firm conviction. "Don't worry, since I've decided to go, I won't be thinking about coming back. Whether it's 3 or 5 years, or even if I stay there for the rest of my life, I won't regret it. As for my son, I trust that Ethan is a good father. He'll take care of him. And one day, my son will be proud of me." The principal was so moved by my words that his eyes welled up with tears. Without further hesitation, he approved my application. Half an hour later, I walked out of his office, holding my transfer order, completely satisfied. By the time I got home, night had already fallen. Inside, the whole family was gathered around the dinner table. Sitting in the center, surrounded by everyone's attention, was Olivia Brooks, smiling sweetly. The table was filled with dishes, all more fragrant and appetizing than anything I had ever cooked. A bitter feeling rose in my heart. 6 years of marriage, and I had only just learned that Ethan could cook. Even the pork stew with vermicelli looked particularly delicious. I tried to suppress my emotions, but my vision still blurred slightly. So that was it. The reason he told me to just make something simple earlier wasn't because he had no money. He simply didn't want to hand it over to me. All these years of love had been nothing but a wasted effort. The moment I stepped inside, Ethan's smile disappeared, bit by bit. He let out a cold scoff, folding his arms as he leaned to the side, looking at me with disdain. "Oh, so you still remember to come home? Do you even know what time it is? The whole family has been waiting for you to make dinner, but you were nowhere to be seen." I sniffed, forcing back the urge to cry. This time, I didn't immediately apologize like I used to. Instead, I stared at him with an indifferent expression. "I had work at school that needed my attention. Listen carefully, Ethan. I'm not a housewife. I have a job too. Don't expect me to spend my whole life revolving around this family. From now on, I won't be responsible for any of you. Don't come to me for anything." The entire room fell into stunned silence. My in-laws gawked at me in shock. My son, who had been happily stuffing his mouth with food, suddenly stopped chewing. Ethan was so caught off guard that his chopsticks slipped from his fingers, but he seemed completely unaware of it. The only one unfazed was Olivia Brooks. She still had a gentle smile on her face, watching the scene unfold as if she were the true lady of the house. "So you must be Emma," she said, her voice soft and pleasant. "You seemed so capable. Ethan talks about you all the time." She cleared her throat, stood up, and looked down at me. Seeing her again, I still couldn't suppress the storm of emotions within me. This woman had loomed over my entire life, taking everything from me, my home, my family, while pretending to be innocent. In this new life, I still found her face just as loathsome. I didn't bother hiding my disgust. I lifted my hand and shoved her aside. I barely used any force. She let out a sharp scream as he fell to the ground. My in-laws slammed the table in outrage, scolding me for my lack of manners, while my son burst into frightened cries. "Bad mommy? You're so mean." I ignored them all. Without a word, I walked past them, heading toward my room. As I passed Ethan, he grabbed my wrist, his face dark with anger. "Emma Carter, did you leave all your manners to the dogs? Apologize to Olivia right now, or get the hell out of this house." His gaze was icy cold, cutting through me like a blade. I knew he was truly furious this time. But for once, I wasn't afraid. How ridiculous. He was willing to throw his wife out just to defend his precious Olivia. A mocking smile curled at my lips as I met his eyes without a trace of fear. Slowly and clearly I said, "Ethan Walker, I've taken care of this family for 6 whole years. What right do you have to tell me to leave?" I will not apologize to anyone. Isn't this exactly what you wanted? To get rid of me so you and Olivia can be together? Fine, I'll grant your wish. I don't want this family anymore. Let's get a divorce. Ethan's face twisted in fury, his voice shaking with disbelief. Emma, what the hell are you saying? I only scolded you a little. Why are you making such a big deal out of it? I didn't bother looking at his infuriating face. I turned and walked straight into my room. For a brief moment, I saw a flicker of panic in Ethan's eyes. He staggered forward, as if wanting to follow me, but I ignored him and slammed the door shut with a loud bang. Outside, chaos erupted. Olivia's soft sobbing, my in-laws muttering in anger, my son wailing at the top of his lungs. But inside my room, I felt nothing but peace. I was done with this house. Done with this heartless husband. Done with the son who had already shown his true nature in my past life. Without hesitation, I carefully folded my transfer papers and tucked them into my chest. Then I turned and began packing my few belongings. For years I had scrimped and saved, making sure the family had new clothes every season while I wore the same few outfits over and over. My clothes were faded from countless washes, the cuffs frayed and thinning, my pants covered in patches. The only things I had in abundance were my books, treasures I had collected before marriage, saving every penny to buy them. As I was nearly finished packing, the door creaked open. Ethan walked in, carrying our son in his arms. He sat on the edge of the bed, his expression flickering with unease. When he finally spoke, there was even a trace of hesitation in his voice. Emma, Olivia is just an old classmate. You're overreacting for no reason. I know you're a little jealous, but there's nothing between us. You don't need to be so hostile toward her. And about today, I won't hold it against you. Just stop making a fuss, and everything will be fine. When I didn't respond, he let out a relieved sigh, as if thinking I had finally calmed down. He then held out our son toward me. Don't talk about divorce so easily. This family needs you. Look at our son. He's so adorable. Can you really bear to leave him? I paused, looking at them with a calm expression. The tear-streaked face of my son overlapped with the cold, heartless expression he had worn in my past life, the one that had filled me with utter despair. I smiled faintly, but didn't reach out to take him. Instead, I said in an indifferent tone, "There's nothing I can't bear. He's your son, after all." Ethan's face turned red with anger. He tightened his grip around our son, making him cry even harder. I remained cold and silent, feeling only exhaustion and disgust. For a long moment, Ethan said nothing. Then, unable to hold back his rage, he finally exploded. Emma Carter, don't push your luck. A mother like you doesn't deserve a son like him. I looked at his furious face, completely unmoved. In my past life, I had been too responsible, too self-sacrificing, and that was exactly why I had been trampled on so cruelly. Ethan let out a sharp scoff before storming out, still carrying our son. I didn't care. I simply lowered my head and continued packing. As I slung my bag over my shoulder and stepped out the door, Olivia Brooks stood at the entrance, her eyes glistening with tears. The moment she saw me, a fleeting trace of provocation flashed through her gaze, so subtle it was almost imperceptible. But when she spoke, her voice carried the delicate, pitiful tone of someone playing the victim. Emma, this is all my fault. I didn't know my place and visited without thinking, upsetting you like this. If you really can't stand me, I'll leave right now. But Ethan works so hard, can't you stop making things difficult for him? I couldn't be bothered to respond. I brushed past her and walked straight toward the door. She let out a soft sob, as if about to chase after me, but Ethan grabbed her arm and held her back. Leave her alone. She's just being overly dramatic. You'll see, she'll come crawling back in no time. Then he softened his tone. Olivia, just stay here for now. Make yourself at home. Tomorrow I'll give you some money, buy whatever you need, don't worry about saving for me. Even as he said this, his eyes kept flicking toward me, clearly meant to provoke. I paused for a moment, recalling the indifferent way he had treated me in my past life. The irony of it all almost made me laugh. Just before stepping out, I turned back. Meeting his smug gaze, I spoke calmly. I'll have the divorce papers drawn up and sent to you. Just sign them when they arrive. Ethan's face froze in shock, his entire expression crumbling in an instant. I let out a soft chuckle, then turned and walked away. This time, I didn't look back. I found a small inn to stay in that night. The room wasn't cheap, and the cost stung a little, but I reminded myself that I was on my own now. My expenses would be minimal from now on, and the teaching assignment came with a generous stipend. The money was worth it. Days passed, and Ethan never once came looking for me. I didn't care. If anything, I enjoyed the peace. I continued going to work as usual. When my coworkers learned I was leaving, they were reluctant to see me go and took extra care of me. Some even volunteered to cover a few of my classes. I counted my savings and set aside a small portion for myself. With the rest, I made a trip to the bookstore and bought as many books as I could carry. The mountain schools lacked so much, especially books. If I could do even a little to help those children learn, then it would all be worth it. Time flew by. There was only 1 week left before my departure. That evening after dinner, I strolled back toward the inn at a leisurely pace. As I neared the entrance, I spotted 2 familiar figures waiting in the cold. Ethan Walker stood there, holding our son's hand. The freezing wind had turned both of their faces red, and they kept shifting their weight, stomping their feet to keep warm. My heart sank. So he had finally come after all. I exhaled slowly, steadying myself before walking toward them. Over the past few days, I had sent the divorce papers to Ethan through someone I trusted, but he had refused to sign them. There was no point dragging this out. I had to end things properly. As I got closer, I noticed something that made my chest tighten. Despite the freezing temperatures, my son was wearing only a thin cotton jacket. His little face was dirty, and his lips were tinged with purple from the cold. Ethan didn't look much better. The once crisp white dress shirt I had always ironed for him was now wrinkled, with grease stains smudging the collar. I couldn't help it. I let out a small laugh. Hearing me, they both looked up. My son let out a soft whimper before running toward me, wrapping his arms around my leg. Ethan, clearly emotional, stammered, "Emma, you're finally back." Before he could say anything more, our son burst into loud sobs again, his tears and snot smearing all over my pants. I crouched down and held out my arms. He immediately broke into a smile, his little hands releasing my leg as he reached for me. But I didn't pick him up. Instead, I gently pushed him away. He stared at me, stunned, his tears frozen mid-fall. Even his cries seemed to get caught in his throat. I stared at him coldly, the same way he had once looked at me in my past life. Ethan didn't seem to notice my indifference. Instead, he grabbed my hand anxiously. "My dad's heart condition flared up again. He's out of medicine. My mom's asthma is getting worse. Please, come home. Without you, everything's a mess." I calmly pulled my hand away, my expression completely blank. What does that have to do with me? They're your parents, not mine. Besides, isn't Olivia living at our house for free? It's only right for her to help out a little. Ethan's hand froze mid-air, his face shifting between embarrassment and frustration. After a long pause, he finally withdrew his hand and hesitated before speaking again. "Emma, are you still mad about Olivia? Please, believe me, she's just an old classmate. She's a woman. I couldn't just let her stay in a motel. It's not safe for her." I almost laughed at how absurd that sounded. So it wasn't safe for her to stay in a motel, but it was perfectly fine for me? My voice turned even colder as I sneered. "I've been staying in a motel for days, and I don't see you worrying about me. And stop trying to fool me. I already looked into it. Olivia isn't just an old classmate. She's the woman you've always loved but could never have. Back then, she thought you were too poor and married someone else. Now that her husband's dead, you're thinking about getting back with her, aren't you?" Ethan's face turned pale in an instant, guilt flickering in his eyes. "Emma, I swear, I don't have any improper thoughts about Olivia. Just bear with it for a little while. Once we move to the mining town, I promise I'll cut ties with her. We'll live a quiet life as a family, all right?" His voice even carried a rare trace of warmth. If I hadn't lived through my past life, I might have fallen for it again. I might have obediently followed him home, played the perfect wife, and convinced myself to endure. But unfortunately for him, I had already seen everything for what it was. Looking into his expectant eyes, I was tempted to tell him I would be leaving soon. But then I realized, what was the point? As he tentatively reached out to pull me into his arms, I took a step back, my voice devoid of warmth. "Ethan, I'm not going with you to the mines. I know you've never forgotten about Olivia. That's fine, I don't care anymore, I'm setting you free. And in return, I hope you'll show some dignity and sign the divorce papers. It was clear he had never expected me to be this cold. His body swayed slightly, his always composed face crumbling as his eyes turned red. Even as his gaze filled with despair, he stubbornly shook his head. No, I won't agree to a divorce. Olivia and I are innocent, you have no right to slander me. Just as the words left his mouth, a shadow darted from the corner of the street. Olivia rushed toward him, shoving me aside as she threw herself into his arms. Her eyes were brimming with tears, her voice trembling with pitiful sorrow. Ethan, I've regretted marrying someone else every single day. I know I shouldn't come between you and Emma, but she's the one who wants to leave you. She doesn't want you anymore. So why can't we start over? She clutched his shirt, crying breathlessly. That night when you got drunk and held me, you cried so much. I knew then that I still had a place in your heart. And besides, you've already ruined my reputation. If you don't take responsibility, how can I go on living? Hearing this, I frowned. So they couldn't even wait until we were divorced before getting together. I didn't bother hiding my disdain. I let out a cold laugh and looked directly at Ethan. This is what you call innocent? Ethan, if you want to be a man, at least have the guts to own up to your actions. Don't make me look down on you even more. Ethan's face turned even paler. He tried to push Olivia away, but she clung to his neck desperately. Tears streamed down her face, so pitiful that even I almost felt sorry for her. But Ethan, for once, wasn't moved. Instead, he forcibly pried her fingers off him, his expression twisted with disgust. Just as he opened his mouth to speak, he suddenly raised his hand and slapped her across the face. "Shut up," he roared. "Say one more word of nonsense and I swear I won't let you off." Olivia stumbled back, covering her cheek in shock. Ethan glared at her with unrestrained fury. "I let you stay at my house out of kindness, and this whole time, you've been plotting to break up my family? Have you no shame?" I had never seen Ethan Walker so utterly unraveled before. His entire body trembled with rage, but the moment he turned to look at me, his expression softened. "Emma, I was drunk that night. I don't even know what happened. Don't listen to Olivia. She's just trying to drive a wedge between us. Can't you believe me?" His voice was desperate, almost pleading. "I swear, as soon as we get home, I'll make Olivia pack her things and leave." Watching him stammer through his explanation, I found it laughable. The man I had once loved, the man I had given my youth to, now, even looking at his face, made me sick. I stood there in silence, watching as he struggled to push Olivia away, while she clung to him like an octopus, wrapping herself around him tighter each time he tried to break free. His panic only deepened as I stared at him without emotion. Then, without a word, I turned and walked into the inn, shutting out everything and everyone behind me. I had no idea when they finally left. By the time I finished washing up and glanced toward the window, the street outside was empty. After Olivia's public meltdown outside the inn that night, rumors spread like wildfire in the small town. My co-workers were furious on my behalf and treated Ethan with nothing but contempt. Whenever they saw him on the street, they would mock him without restraint. Yet, despite the humiliation, he shamelessly came looking for me several times, only to be stopped at the inn's entrance by the staff. His persistence annoyed me to no end. But in the end, before I left, he finally signed the divorce papers. I heard it was because Olivia, unable to bear the rumors, had slit her wrist in front of a crowd. The wound wasn't deep, it had nearly healed by the time she reached the hospital, but Ethan still wept uncontrollably when he got the news. He held her in his arms, comforting her for hours, completely ignoring the judgmental stares around him. When he came to deliver the signed divorce papers, he stood outside for a long time, hesitant to come closer. His face was gaunt, his features worn down by exhaustion. "Emma, I'm sorry," he murmured. "Olivia isn't like you. If I don't divorce you, she really will die." I accepted the papers without hesitation and nodded. "It's fine. I don't mind." He looked at me, stunned, as if unable to believe how indifferent I was. I turned and walked away without another word. And I wasn't lying. I truly didn't care anymore. I was on the verge of stepping into a new, bright future, and nothing he said or did could change that. 2 days later, I boarded the train heading to the mountains. As the train prepared to depart, I wanted to take one last glance at the place I had once called home. But just as I looked out the window, I caught sight of Ethan in the crowd. His eyes were red as he pushed his way toward my carriage, desperation written all over his face. "Emma, why didn't you tell me you were leaving to teach in the mountains? What am I supposed to do? What about our son?" His voice cracked as he called out, "Emma, don't go. I can't let you go." The train slowly began to move, his shouts fading into the noise of the bustling station. Panicked, Ethan tried to chase after it, only to be tripped by someone in the crowd. He fell to the ground, scrambling to get up, his face smeared with dust and desperation. Yet all he could do was watch as the train carried me further and further away. Eventually, he sank to his knees among the sea of people, covering his face as he sobbed. The conditions in the mountains were harsh, but I didn't mind. After all, I had already endured the worst in my past life. Compared to that, this was nothing. The people here were simple and kind. There was no scheming, no betrayal. My only responsibility was to teach my students, and in my free time, I buried myself in books. I had given up my own son, yet here I had gained more love than I had ever known. The children were grateful for my presence and showered me with affection, and I embraced it without hesitation. I ended up staying for 10 years. Somehow, Ethan found out where I was. He sent me letter after letter, every single one begging me to come back. He rambled on and on about how his parents had suffered without my care, how their health had declined, how the doctors said they wouldn't live much longer. He told me our son cried every day, devastated by my absence. As for Olivia, she had been clinging to him, desperate to marry him, but he had firmly rejected her. His letters always ended with the same words. He begged me countless times to give him another chance. He wrote that only after I left did he realize how terribly wrong he had been, that this family couldn't function without me, and most of all, that he couldn't live without me. I never replied. At first, I would at least read his letters with an expressionless face before tearing them to shreds and tossing them away. But as time passed, I didn't even bother opening them. I threw them straight into the fire, watching them burn to ashes. Yet even without a response, Ethan remained relentless. Perhaps he thought that as long as he kept trying, I would eventually soften, unable to let go of him and our son. Too bad for him, I felt nothing. After 10 years, my time teaching in the mountains came to an end, and I was finally preparing to return to the city. But this time, I wasn't returning alone. Alongside me was my new husband. Like me, he was a teacher who had come to the mountains to serve. Over the past 10 years, we had been co-workers, partners, and comrades through hardship. Due to the limitations of our situation, our wedding had been simple, far less grand than the one I once had with Ethan. But he cared for me in ways Ethan never had. With him, I was cherished and protected, and I had long since stopped thinking about Ethan or my past life with him. It was nothing more than dust in the wind, completely insignificant. When the train arrived at the city station, I stepped off, holding my husband's hand. After 10 years, I saw Ethan Walker again. He stood in the crowd, clutching a bouquet of flowers, his face beaming with joy. But the moment he saw me holding another man's hand, the light in his eyes instantly vanished. I didn't avoid him. Instead, I walked through the crowd and stood right in front of him. 10 years had passed, and he had aged considerably. The once proud and upright man was now hunched, his temples streaked with gray. His eyes were dim, his lips trembling uncontrollably. "Emma, you got married?" His voice was hoarse, as if struggling to believe it. I met his gaze without hesitation and nodded. "Yes, this is my husband. What about you? How's Olivia?" His Adam's apple bobbed, his voice uncertain. We're doing well." I let out a soft chuckle, not bothering to expose his lie. I had stayed in touch with old colleagues and friends over the years. I knew exactly what had happened to him. After I left, Olivia had repeatedly threatened suicide when Ethan refused to marry her. At first, he tolerated it, but after a few times, he lost patience. No matter how much she cried, he refused to acknowledge her. But Olivia, desperate to prove her devotion, took things a step further. She threw herself off a building. She didn't die, but she was left permanently paralyzed. The doctors said she would spend the rest of her life with a catheter and would never walk again. The incident caused a huge scandal, and under immense public pressure, Ethan had no choice but to take her in, vowing to care for her for the rest of his life. His dreams of going to the mining town vanished. Even his job was barely saved. He had to kneel outside his workplace for an entire day, begging to keep his position. From then on, his meager salary had to support not only his son and aging parents but also Olivia, who now required constant medical care. He could no longer afford medicine for his parents, nor could he pay for his son's schooling. There was no money to hire a caretaker, so his elderly parents were forced to take care of Olivia themselves. In just a few short years, both of them passed away. Desperate, Ethan tried to leave Olivia in the care of his son, who had already been filled with resentment after I left. One day, when Ethan wasn't home, his son beat Olivia viciously, venting years of frustration. Afterward, he left a note behind and disappeared without a trace. Ethan's family was completely shattered. For 3 days and 3 nights, he locked himself in his house, wailing in despair. But no matter how much he grieved, life had to go on. With no other choice, he took on the responsibility of personally caring for Olivia. After exhausting days of work, he would return home only to be met with more suffering. Over time, his temper worsened. People whispered that he abused Olivia behind closed doors. There were nights when neighbors heard her anguished screams and considered calling the police. Social workers had even intervened a few times, but in the end, it was a situation of mutual destruction, one willing to endure, the other resigned to their fate. Eventually, no one cared enough to interfere. Ethan had been utterly crushed by life. Hearing all this, I felt nothing, not satisfaction, not pity. He had become nothing more than a stranger to me. Now, seeing him again after so many years, I found that I had nothing more to say. I politely bid Ethan Walker farewell, took my husband's hand, and prepared to leave. Behind me, Ethan clenched his fists, trying his best to suppress his grief. Just as I was about to step out of the station, his voice, thick with tears, called out after me. If I had never brought Olivia home back then, would we have been happy now? I didn't stop walking. Without turning around, I answered lightly, life doesn't work that way. If I could do it all over again, I wouldn't have married you in the first place. Behind me, Ethan collapsed to the ground, sobbing uncontrollably. He never understood that it wasn't Olivia who had cost him his happiness. It was his own indecisive heart. I had only returned to the city to visit old friends. Soon I would leave again, this time to settle down in my husband's city, starting a new chapter of my life. On my last day in town, I received news. Ethan Walker had taken his own life. That day, he had returned home in a daze. Olivia, who hadn't eaten all day, was screaming and cursing at him. He had already been crushed under the weight of his life, and those insults became the final straw. Without a word, he walked into the kitchen, mixed a lethal dose of sleeping pills into the meal he had prepared, and fed every bite to Olivia. Once she had fallen unconscious, he turned on the gas. Then, he sat on the couch, lit one last cigarette, and waited for everything to end. The hospital, upon learning that I had returned, contacted me to identify his body. I refused without hesitation. My husband was puzzled. Why won't you go see him one last time? I smiled faintly, my mind flashing back to my past life, when I had lost too much blood and lay on my deathbed, my vision fading. I had pleaded for Ethan to look at me one last time. But all I had gotten in return was his impatient voice. Emma, stop being so dramatic. You're the one who refused to divorce me, so don't blame me for being heartless. You're dying anyway, just let it go. Even in my next life, I never want to see you again. So I would grant his wish. Not in the next life, nor the one after that. For all eternity, I never wanted to see him again. Love had been my choice, and I had no regrets. But I also deserved a better future.